In the vast, unforgiving plains of Kansas Territory, 1849, there once stood a medical facility that history has tried desperately to forget. Weathered brick walls rising from nowhere, surrounded by nothing but waving prairie grass for miles, Holloway Institute for Feminine Nervous Disorders. Records show that between 1845 and 1851, 143 young women entered through its heavy oak doors. Only 62 would ever leave. The account you're about to hear comes from a collection of documents that remained sealed in the University of Kansas archives until 2018. Physician logs, correspondence between doctors, and fragments of a leather-bound journal found hidden beneath a floorboard during the building's demolition in 1897. These papers speak of a case that defied every medical understanding of the time. A case that would haunt the dreams of even the most rational minds involved. Science advances through observation, hypothesis, and controlled experimentation, wrote Dr. William Holloway in a letter to his colleagues in Boston. But what happens when we observe something that violates the very laws we believe govern our reality? Do we reject the evidence, or do we reject our understanding? Are you brave enough to know what happened behind those walls? What you're about to learn isn't a tale of superstition or religious mania, as many would later claim. No, it was something far more rational and infinitely more dangerous. The moment when science, faced with the unexplainable, chose to destroy rather than understand. Kansas Territory in 1849 was a place of transitions and tensions. The endless prairie stretched like an ocean of grass, broken only by the occasional settlement or trading post. Winds carried the scent of soil and wildflowers in spring, dust and smoke in autumn. At night, the silence was absolute, save for when it wasn't. Holloway Institute stood 3 miles outside the small town of Coopersville, isolated enough to ensure privacy, but close enough to maintain supplies and communication. Its founder, Dr. William Holloway, had established himself as a forward-thinking physician, specializing in female maladies of the nervous system. A graduate of Harvard Medical School, his reputation attracted wealthy families from as far as St. Louis and Chicago, desperate to cure daughters who exhibited behaviors deemed inappropriate or troubling. The staff consisted of Dr. Holloway himself, 2 assistant physicians, Dr. Morris Reed and Dr. Thomas Ainsworth, and 7 nurses, led by head nurse Margaret Winters, a stern woman whose devotion to Dr. Holloway bordered on reverence. The institute operated under the emerging theories of neurological science, rejecting older notions of female hysteria caused by wandering wombs, in favor of newer beliefs in brain chemistry and nervous system imbalances. In the America of 1849, a young woman's value was measured primarily by her marriageability, her obedience, and her moral purity. Those who questioned too much, read too deeply, or showed independence were often diagnosed with nervous excitement or feminine melancholia. Families paid handsome sums to have daughters returned to them, corrected and compliant. Dr. Holloway promised results through his pioneering methods of hydrotherapy, controlled diet, moral education, and when necessary, more invasive treatments. It all changed in April of 1849 when Eliza Thorpe arrived. Jacob Miller, a local trapper who regularly sold furs and game to the Institute's kitchen, was the first outsider to notice something unusual. On a cool spring morning, he was approaching the Institute when he saw a carriage arrive. Nothing strange about that. New patients came every month. But this time, as the slight figure of a girl no older than 17 descended from the carriage, Jacob swore the grass around her feet withered and curled inward. "Thought my eyes were playing tricks," he later told his wife, "but then I saw the driver's face. Man looked like he'd been riding with the devil herself." Jacob watched as 2 nurses escorted the girl inside. She moved with curious precision, her steps measured and even, her face completely blank. Most girls arrived crying or sedated. This one seemed somehow both present and absent at once. That night, Jacob was skinning rabbits in his cabin when he felt a sudden chill. The candle beside him flickered without any breeze. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw that same girl standing in the corner of his room, watching him with eyes that reflected no light. When he reported what he'd seen to Sheriff Collins the next day, the man laughed. "You've been drinking that home brew again, Jake. Or maybe you should be checking into Holloway yourself." But Jacob couldn't forget what he'd seen, especially when his dreams that night filled with the image of a girl walking backward up the Institute's main staircase, her neck bent at an impossible angle, her eyes fixed on him the entire time. Within weeks of Eliza's arrival, 3 other patients began exhibiting unusual symptoms. Girls who had been making appropriate progress suddenly became lethargic, their responses delayed, their expressions vacant. Nurse Winters noted in her log that 17-year-old Catherine Spencer, previously rebellious and argumentative, now sat for hours staring at walls, answering questions with perfect obedience, but lacking any inflection in her voice. Mary Edwards, admitted for excessive literary pursuits and refusal of suitable marriage proposals, stopped speaking altogether after sharing a room with Eliza for just 2 nights. When her parents visited, her father broke down in tears. "That's not my daughter," he whispered to Dr. Reed. "She looks like Mary, but her eyes, there's nothing behind them anymore." The most disturbing case was Rebecca Hamilton, who had previously shown improvement through Dr. Holloway's treatments. After being assigned to the same therapy group as Eliza, she began waking other patients with her screaming. When restrained and questioned, she would only repeat, "She gets inside when you sleep. She's learning how to wear us." Each affected girl showed the same physical symptoms: dramatically lowered body temperature, reduced blinking, and most disturbingly, small circular bruises at the nape of the neck and behind the ears, as if something had pressed hard against the base of the skull. Dr. Holloway initially attributed these changes to a contagious form of catatonia, perhaps spread through suggestion among impressionable young women, but in private notes he expressed growing unease. Subject E.T. appears to be the vector for this unusual condition. Most troubling is not the symptoms themselves, but the fact that they appear to be transmissible through proximity alone. No physical contact is necessary. The turning point came when Sarah Blackwood arrived at the Institute in early June, a 19-year-old daughter of a prominent judge who had displayed alarming tendencies towards scientific inquiry inappropriate to her sex. Unlike the other girls, Sarah's intelligence was matched by a fierce will that even her father's authority couldn't break. From her first day, Sarah noticed the strange quiet that permeated certain wings of the building. She observed how nurses avoided specific rooms, how they would never turn their backs on certain patients. And she noticed Eliza Thorpe, always watched, yet somehow never truly seen. "There is something deeply wrong here," Sarah wrote in a journal she kept hidden in the lining of her dress. "The girl with the colorless eyes is the center of it all. Today I saw Nurse Fletcher walk past her in the hall. When Eliza looked at her, the nurse's steps faltered. For just a moment, they moved in perfect unison, like a reflection. Then the nurse continued on, apparently unaware but different somehow. Sarah began documenting everything. Which girls spent time near Eliza, how quickly they changed, the patterns of the bruises on their skin. She mapped the building, noting where the empty ones, as she called them, were kept at night. She recorded whispered conversations among the staff, mentions of the contagion, the influence, and most frequently, the experiment. Dr. Holloway's methods of control were subtle at first. Reduced food for disobedience, ice baths for excessive emotion, solitary confinement for questioning. But as Sarah continued her secret observations, the tactics intensified. She was monitored constantly, denied books and writing materials, and subjected to daily calming treatments of morphine and chloral hydrate. Yet she persisted, growing more determined as she realized the truth. They are not trying to cure us at all. They are studying what happens when we change, and Eliza, whatever she is now, is their perfect creation. Then came the night Sarah overheard Dr. Holloway and Dr. Reed arguing in the laboratory on the Institute's lowest level, a space patients were never allowed to see. "We've gone too far," Dr. Reed insisted. "Whatever is happening to these girls, it's spreading faster than we can control it." "Control was never the point," Dr. Holloway replied coldly. "Understanding is. And she's showing us something remarkable, something beyond our current scientific framework." "At what cost, William? They're not coming back. Whatever is replacing them isn't human anymore." "Then perhaps humanity is merely a stage, not an end point." Sarah knew then that she would be next. Eliza had begun watching her, following her with those empty eyes, and Dr. Holloway had scheduled Sarah for a special procedure the following day. That night, as rain lashed against the windows of Holloway Institute, Sarah Blackwood made her move. The spring thunderstorm had disrupted the usual routine. Nurse Winters was occupied with a leaking roof in the east wing, and the night attendant had dozed off after taking what Sarah suspected was a dose of the same laudanum they forced upon agitated patients. With trembling hands, Sarah retrieved her hidden journal and the small brass key she had painstakingly copied from wax impressions when left alone in Dr. Reed's office. The thunder provided perfect cover as she slipped from her room and made her way through the darkened corridors, navigating by memory and the occasional flash of lightning. The laboratory door was locked, as expected, but the key turned smoothly. The room beyond was a nightmare of modern medicine. Glass cabinets filled with specimens, surgical tools arranged on trays, and most disturbing of all, a set of leather restraints attached to a metal examination table in the center of the room. "Dear God," Sarah whispered, her breath visible in the unnaturally cold air. She worked quickly, scouring the room for evidence. In a locked drawer, the lock easily picked with a hairpin, she found Dr. Holloway's private research journal. The pages contained meticulous notes on each girl who had transitioned, as he called it, following exposure to Eliza. Temperature readings, pupillary responses, blood analyses, and most chillingly, detailed observations of behavioral changes. One passage made her blood freeze. "Subject ET appears to be acting as a conduit for something I cannot yet identify. The process begins with proximity, accelerates with direct eye contact, and completes during unconsciousness. Most remarkable is the neural reorganization. The girls' minds are being systematically reconstructed according to some pattern that ET carries within her. They are becoming vessels, but vessels for what?" Tucked between the journal pages, Sarah found correspondence with a Dr. Friedrich Westhoff of Vienna, who had apparently sent Eliza to Holloway. The letter described her as a most unusual case discovered in an orphanage where every child and caretaker had gradually succumbed to the same vacant state. Westhoff had written, "I believe we have found our perfect subject. Whatever inhabits this girl has refined its method through dozens of previous hosts. Send me your observations. Together we will unlock the mystery of consciousness itself." Sarah's hands shook as she copied the most damning passages into her own journal. As she worked, the temperature in the room plummeted further. The candle beside her flickered, then went out altogether. She wasn't alone. In the doorway stood Eliza Thorpe, still wearing her nightgown, her pale feet bare against the cold floor. Her face was expressionless as always, but her eyes, Sarah could now see in the lightning flashes, were wrong. The pupils had expanded until almost no iris remained, and they seemed to reflect light that wasn't present in the room. "You're not Eliza anymore, are you?" Sarah whispered, backing away slowly. "What are you?" Eliza's head tilted at an unnatural angle. When she spoke, her voice was layered, as if multiple people were speaking in imperfect unison. "We are becoming," she said, "as you will become." Sarah clutched the journal to her chest. "The others, are they still in there? Can they be brought back?" "They are not gone. They are incorporated." Eliza took a step forward, moving with that same mechanical precision. Dr. Holloway wishes to understand. We wish to spread. You wish to escape. All paths lead to the same outcome. A tremendous crash of thunder shook the building, and in that moment of distraction, Sarah bolted past Eliza into the corridor. She ran blindly, no longer concerned with stealth, knowing only that she needed to get out, to take what she had learned to someone who could help. Behind her, she heard not footsteps, but a strange sliding sound, as if Eliza moved in a way human legs were not designed to move. The main doors were locked at night, but Sarah had studied the building too thoroughly to be trapped. She made for the kitchen, with its delivery entrance that was barred only from the inside. As she ran, she became aware of other figures emerging from darkened rooms, the other transitioned girls, moving in perfect coordination, cutting off possible escape routes, herding her. In the kitchen, Sarah frantically worked the heavy wooden bar from its brackets. Outside, the storm raged, promising cold and exposure, but also freedom. As the bar finally lifted, she felt a hand on her shoulder, ice cold and gripping with unnatural strength. She didn't look back. With a desperate wrench, she broke free, leaving a piece of her nightgown in the grasp of whatever had been Catherine Spencer just weeks before. Sarah burst into the storm, the mud immediately sucking at her bare feet as she ran toward the distant lights of Coopersville. By some miracle, or perhaps because whatever hunted her was reluctant to be seen beyond the Institute's walls, Sarah made it to town. Soaked, shivering, and half delirious, she pounded on the door of the local newspaper office, where editor Franklin Pierce often worked late into the night. Pierce later described her as a wild creature, more ghost than girl, clutching a sodden journal to her chest, and speaking of horrors too outlandish to print in a respectable publication. Nevertheless, something in her terror convinced him to listen. "You don't understand," Sarah had gasped, spreading her waterlogged papers on his desk. "It's not just about the abuse or the terrible treatments. Something is taking these girls, taking their minds, and Dr. Holloway is helping it." Pierce, a pragmatic man who prided himself on his modern thinking, struggled to make sense of her claims. "Miss, these are serious accusations against a respected physician. Are you certain you haven't—" "Look," she interrupted, turning her head to show him the back of her neck. There, just beginning to form, was a perfect circle of bruises at the base of her skull. "It's starting. I can feel it trying to get in when I sleep. I have to stay awake." Pierce offered her shelter for the night, but by morning, he had become concerned enough to send for Sheriff Collins. The lawman arrived, skeptical, but left troubled after reading Dr. Holloway's journal and seeing the evidence Sarah had collected. "I ain't one for ghost stories," Collins said, buckling on his gun belt. "But I know abuse of power when I see it. I'll ride out there today with a couple of deputies." Sarah gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Not after dark," she pleaded. "Whatever is happening there is stronger at night. And don't look directly at the girls who've already changed. Especially not Eliza." Collins patted her hand reassuringly, though the fear in her eyes unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "We'll bring Dr. Holloway and his associates back for questioning. Get this all sorted out proper-like." As the sheriff organized his men, Sarah sat by the window in Pierce's office, staring out at the Institute barely visible on the horizon. "They'll be looking for me," she murmured. "They can't let me expose them." Pierce, unsure how to comfort her, simply asked, "What do you think they really want, these doctors?" Sarah's gaze remained fixed on the distant building. "Dr. Reed wanted to help, I think, at first, but Dr. Holloway, he wants to understand something that human minds aren't meant to comprehend. He believes he's witnessing evolution, the next stage of human consciousness." "And what does Eliza want?" Sarah finally turned to him, her eyes bloodshot from forced wakefulness. "To spread, to convert, to incorporate. It called itself we, never I. Whatever it is, it thinks like a colony, not an individual." When Sheriff Collins and his 3 deputies reached the Holloway Institute that afternoon, they found the front gates open and unattended. No one answered their calls as they approached the main building. Inside, the halls were empty, unnaturally so. Beds were made, rooms were tidy, but not a single person could be found. The only signs of disturbance were in the laboratory, where drawers hung open and papers were scattered across the floor. "It's like they just up and left," Deputy Wilson whispered, his voice echoing in the abandoned building. Sheriff Collins frowned, checking his pocket watch. "We've got 3 hours till sundown. Search every room, every closet. Someone has to be here." But as the hands of his watch moved closer to dusk, they found nothing but small, troubling details. A meal half-eaten in the dining hall, a line of muddy footprints that led to a wall and then inexplicably stopped. And most disturbing of all, a single shoe belonging to Dr. Reed, lying in the center of his office with what appeared to be fingernail scratches marking the floor around it. As the sun began its descent, an unnatural stillness fell over the Institute. Sheriff Collins ordered his men to gather in the main hall, increasingly uneasy about the emptiness of the building. "We leave before dark," he announced, trying to mask his growing dread with authority. "Something ain't right here, and I won't have my men—" Deputy Miller cut him off. "Sheriff, you should see this." In the Institute's records room, they found a hidden door behind a bookshelf, revealed only because it stood slightly ajar. Beyond it lay a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "I ain't going down there," Deputy Wilson said flatly, "not without more men and proper lights." Collins hesitated, then nodded. "We'll come back tomorrow with reinforcements. For now, we've seen enough to warrant a full investigation." As they turned to leave, a soft voice called from below, "Help, please." Collins recognized that voice. It was Dr. Reed. Against his better judgment, with only a lantern to guide them, Collins and Deputy Miller descended the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and a strange smell, like wet clay and something metallic, filled their nostrils. The basement chamber was vast, far larger than seemed possible given the building's dimensions above. Stone walls glistened with moisture, and in the center of the room stood Dr. Reed, or what remained of him. The man was on his knees, his once immaculate shirt now torn and stained. When he looked up at them, his eyes were clear and terrified. "You have to end this," he whispered. "We went too far. Holloway doesn't understand what he's unleashed." Collins approached cautiously. "Where is everyone, Dr. Reed? Where are the patients?" Reed's laugh was brittle, verging on hysteria. "Everywhere. Nowhere. They're changing, Sheriff. Becoming something else. And it's spreading faster than we could have imagined." "The girl, Eliza, was never a girl," Reed interrupted. "Not really. Not by the time she came to us. Westhoff knew. He sent her here deliberately to see what would happen in controlled conditions. And Holloway, God help him, he saw it as the opportunity of a lifetime." Miller kept his rifle trained on Reed, uncomfortable with the man's erratic behavior. "What exactly are we dealing with here, Doc?" Reed closed his eyes, swaying slightly. "I don't have the language to explain it properly. A consciousness that exists between minds rather than within them. A pattern that rewrites the human brain to make it compatible, then spreads to others. Eliza was just its most perfected vessel." "Where is Dr. Holloway now?" Collins demanded. "Gone. They've all gone deeper. There are chambers below this one, tunnels that weren't on any blueprint. Holloway had them dug last year, said he needed more space for his research." Reed's voice dropped to a whisper. "But I think something was already down there, waiting, something that called to Eliza from the moment she arrived." A sudden crash from above made them all jump. Collins grabbed Reed's arm. "We're leaving. Now, you can tell us everything back in town." Reed shook his head, a strange calm settling over his features. "It's too late for me, Sheriff. I can feel it working its way through my thoughts already. Been fighting it since yesterday, but—" He tapped the back of his neck, where the now familiar circular bruises were clearly visible. "It gets in while you sleep, you see. and I made the mistake of closing my eyes. Miller backed toward the stairs. "Sheriff, we need to go." But Collins hesitated, his conscience warring with his instinct for self-preservation. "We can't just leave him." "You must," Reed insisted. "And when you get back to town, there's only one thing that will stop this from spreading." He pressed a folded paper into Collins' hand. "Complete destruction. Fire is the only way. Burn it all, right down to the foundation stones." The crashing above grew louder, accompanied now by the sound of many feet moving in perfect, unnatural unison. Collins and Miller didn't need further convincing. They ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind them, Reed called out one final warning. "Don't look in their eyes. Whatever you do, don't—" His voice cut off with a strangled cry. The deputies were waiting anxiously by the front door, reporting that something was moving on the upper floors. Collins ordered an immediate retreat, and the men fled into the gathering dusk. As they mounted their horses, Collins glanced back at the institute. Faces appeared at every window, dozens of them, patients and staff alike, all watching with the same blank expression. And in the center window of the highest floor stood Eliza Thorpe, her pale face almost luminous in the fading light. For one terrible moment, their eyes met across the distance. Collins would later tell Sarah that in that instant he felt something cold and alien brush against his mind, like fingers testing a lock, searching for a way in. The men rode hard for Coopersville, not slowing until the lights of town came into view. Only then did Collins open the paper Dr. Reed had given him. It contained a hastily drawn map of the tunnel system beneath the institute, with one area circled repeatedly, labeled simply, "The Source." By the time they reached town, it was fully dark. They found Franklin Pierce's office in chaos. Furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere, and no sign of either Pierce or Sarah. "They've taken them," Collins realized with sinking dread. "They've already reached town." Over the next 3 days, panic spread through Coopersville. Families reported loved ones going missing, only to return hours later with no memory of their absence and a new unsettling emptiness behind their eyes. Those who had direct contact with Sarah or had visited Pierce's office were the first affected. Collins tried desperately to organize a response, but his deputies began disappearing one by one. The telegraph operator sent frantic messages to nearby settlements before he too went silent. When riders were sent to the next town for help, they never returned. On the 4th night, Collins, one of the few still unaffected, gathered the remaining townspeople in the church. With Reed's map and Sarah's journal, he explained what they faced and what needed to be done. "It ain't natural what's happening," he told them, his voice steady despite his fear. "And it ain't something we can arrest or reason with. Dr. Reed gave his life to tell us there's only one solution." Before dawn, 30 men rode out to the Holloway Institute carrying torches and kerosene. They found the building silent, apparently deserted once again. Working quickly, they doused every floor, every room, every piece of furniture. Collins himself led a smaller group to the basement, following Reed's map, to place the largest quantities of fuel near the source. What they found there, a chamber of smooth black stone that predated the institute, predated the settlement of Kansas itself, none of them would ever fully describe. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Collins gave the order. The institute blazed against the morning sky, black smoke billowing upward in a column visible for miles. The men waited, watching as the fire consumed everything, wood, brick, and finally the strange stone chamber deep below. They believed it was over. Perhaps it was, for a time. But in the decades that followed, unusual cases began appearing in mental institutions across America. Patients who moved with perfect, mechanical precision, who spoke in layered voices, who seemed to share thoughts without speaking. Doctors noted the same distinctive bruising at the base of the skull, the same vacant stare, the same cooling of body temperature. In 1897, when the ruins of Holloway Institute were finally cleared for new construction, workers discovered a small metal box buried deep in the ground, untouched by the fire. Inside was a final journal entry in what appears to be Sarah Blackwood's handwriting. "It doesn't need the building anymore. It has us now. Vessels that can walk and travel and spread." Dr. Holloway thought he was studying it, but it was studying us all along, learning how we're made, how we think, how we connect. The fire may destroy this place, but we've already carried it out into the world. When minds touch, it moves between them. A thought can be contagious. A consciousness can be shared. And whatever began here will never truly end. The journal was filed away in university archives, mentioned only in obscure medical papers, and eventually forgotten, until now. When science reaches beyond understanding into exploitation, when human beings become subjects rather than individuals, a darkness emerges that no field of study can fully illuminate. The girls of Holloway Institute were sacrificed in the name of progress, their identities dissolved into something older and colder than human consciousness was ever meant to touch. And somewhere, perhaps even now, the pattern continues to spread, one mind at a time.